So good morning, everybody. And since I know that I am what divides you from the lunch, I will be short in 10 minutes. But I think it's very important because what I'm going to present here today. So last week, the Network for Greener Financial System, which includes over 150 central banks and financial regulators and authorities all over the world, launched a new set of scenarios. These are short-term climate scenarios. And I had the privilege with my team to support the NGFS in these developments, bringing for the first time really academic models for policy. So basically, what are the key innovations? So scenarios are short-term. They focus on 5-year time horizon. And in this regard, they fill a major gap that we had before, in particular for decision-making in policy and investments and finance, for instance, for stress test frameworks. So these are much more relevant. There is much more granular focus on risk, both physical risk. We consider tail and compound risk for floods, storms, heat waves, droughts, and wildfire. And risks are assessed at much more granular level. So we have over 46 sectors and 50 countries in the world. Importantly, for the first time, we have a full integration of real economy and financial sector feedbacks, meaning that we can see how changes in the sectoral probability of default, sectoral cost of capital, scenario contingent valuation adjustment for equity, corporate bonds, and sovereign bonds, and the monetary policy response to inflation, feedback to macroeconomic performance and financial stability. And we can consider the cross-regional transmission of shocks, meaning that we can consider short-term spillover effects of both transition and physical risk through trade linkages, financial markets, and also disrupted supply chain, which are particularly relevant for critical materials and minerals, which are crucial for making the transition, such as batteries. And last but not least, since a lot of you come from central banking and financial institutions, for the first time, we have ready to use and plug into your internal models sectoral probability of defaults, LGD, and so on. So the main result is that we have shocks, thanks to the model setting and integration that we use, we have results with bigger and persistent shocks on GDP, which make it more relevant for financial supervisors. What we find is that, on the one hand, effective climate policies and global coordination on climate limit the negative effects, limit the negative short-term, I mean, we have a 5-year time horizon, effects of the transition, in particular, gradual carbon price increase and effective recycling of the carbon tax revenues into green investment limit global output losses to 0.5% of GDP in 2030, while effectively reducing emissions. So this even strengthened the message that we had before, that an orderly and coordinated transition is good for the economy. On the other hand, we have a much more negative effects, not only on the economy, but also on finance, of a disorderly transition. So a rapid and unexpected policy shift increases the economic cost and causes financial stress. So we have adjustment in PDs in several sectors, such as power supply, of over 10 percentage points. And this is due to capital intensity and debt to capital ratio of the sector. We also find is that compound weather events in a region can cause large GDP losses, affecting not only that region or country, but the global economy by considering global supply chains and trade relations. And impacts could be even very large, so over 12% of GDP in some regions, such as Africa, and very consistent in Asia. And this has an effect on the sectoral PD, which increase considerably. Finally, supply chain bottlenecks caused by climate disasters in some regions can generate large and persisting GDP losses and macroeconomic spillover, reaching even 3% of GDP by 2030. This is just the framework. I will not go through that, but just to tell you that the climate risk, the real economy, are finally connected to financial sector, where we have credit risk, market risk, investor sentiments that drive transition risk, and capital cost adjustment. How we do this? This is the modeling framework. We have 3 models. So first, we have a computable general equilibrium model with over 46 sectors and 50 countries that takes the transition policies, translates them into scenario contingent carbon price trajectories that are elaborated in the Irene, which is a Stoffler consistent agent-based model that provides inflation adjustment and monetary policy response, so policy rate adjustment that feed into ClimaCred, which is a climate credit risk model for scenario contingent valuation. ClimaCred provides scenario contingent adjustment of sectoral probability of default, LGD, and sectoral adjustment of stocks, corporate bonds, and sovereign bonds for all the sectors and countries considered. And this feeds back into geometry that then provides us the disaggregated results at the sectoral and country level. The narratives are different from the long-term scenarios because they, of course, we focus on the short term, meaning that the results are provided either at the semestral or annual level until 2030. We still have a highway to Paris, which will be mostly similar to the orderly transition scenario, a sudden wake-up call, which is a more disorderly transition than before. Interesting, we have combination of, we have a scenario which is diverging realities that combines transition risk in advanced economies that have money to make the to introduce policies and make the transition, while we have large physical risk and poor adaptation in low-income and emerging countries, which are tightly connected to trade linkages and financial linkages to the high-income countries. And then we have a scenario which is called disasters and policy stagnation, which, well, resembles quite well what's going on right now. So we have a sequence of region-specific extreme events occurring in 2026 and 2027, including compounding events for dry events and wet events, which result in capital destruction, low productivity and production, and creates cascading economic impacts. We have then trade and financial linkages which amplify shocks and could lead to economic and financial stability. Since I have 2 minutes, I go straight on the results. So what we see here, this is at the regional level, but in terms of macroeconomic impacts, but if you go on the NGFS database explorer for short-term scenarios, you have results at the country level, and it's all European, including, so 50 countries, including all EU member states. So what we have is that in the disasters and policy stagnation scenario that I just mentioned, we have a large shock on GDP, which could reach also -6% in Asia or 12% in Africa as a result of the shock up to 2027. And we have a large shock on, so we have adjustments in inflation, which increases, and it's tamed down then and triggers monetary policy response, which is the dotted line here. Differently for different countries. In these scenarios, we assume that the physical shocks affect low-income and emerging countries. So for instance, and you see the effect in South America driven by compound physical risk. And instead, in high-income countries like Europe and North America and Asia, some parts in Asia, like in Japan, we have effects triggered by mostly transition risk and the shock on supply chains that affects critical materials. And finally, these shocks affect financial sector dynamics, where we have extreme physical risk events that lead to an increase in the cost of capital and sectoral PD across sectors and countries. And here you see an example of some sectors like agriculture, wind, solar panels, power supply, coal, gas, oil, consumer goods, and so on. Basically, the agricultural sector is hit hardest. financially but physical risk, with in particular as a result of dry events, so droughts, wildfire, and so on, which cause high productivity loss and thus drive up the cost of capital. Wet events instead, wet events instead rise financial risk across the sector due to production loss and capital destruction. And as you can see here, so the different colors of the bars are dry events or wet events. Basically, the power supply sector is the one hit harder. What you see on the y-axis are the probability of default and cost of capital at the global level as a difference from the baseline in PP. Good, and with this, I just wanted to give you a glimpse of what you can find in the NGFS short-term scenarios and why they could matter for you. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much.